Have you ever heard of a scenario more completely absurd than this? Donald Trump may have, completely by accident, pardoned the pipe bomber, who claims to be one of his most loyal election-denying supporters.
It's a level of irony that you couldn't write in a political thriller. It would be rejected for being too unbelievable.
Right. And today, we're going to get into that. We're looking at the arrest of the January 6th pipe bomber suspect, Brian Cole Jr. And the facts, well, the facts are one thing, but what our sources are really digging into is the built-in farce surrounding it.
It's this dense knot of contradictions. It's a self-inflicted political and legal wound.
And it immediately just blows up that whole Migrano conspiracy universe that insisted for years the bomber had to be some deep state agent or an anti-Trump plant.
Exactly. But Cole is allegedly telling investigators, no, I'm a Trumper. I did this because I thought the election was stolen. So that narrative is just gone.
It's gone. And with that as the foundation, we can see these, 3 layers of absurdity that this one arrest just peels back.
That's the mission today. We're going to drill down into those 3 layers. First, there's the genuine legal paradox.
The accidental pardon.
The accidental pardon. Yeah. The theory that Cole's lawyers could actually use Trump's extraordinarily broad clemency grant as a defense.
Which is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Then second, the political hypocrisy. It's off the charts.
You have officials like Kash Patel praising the FBI for the arrest, while at the same time championing pardons for people convicted of seditious conspiracy. It just doesn't compute.
Not at all. And the third layer is maybe the most, corrosive, the institutional insult.
Right. We have to look at the leadership of the FBI itself. The deputy director, Dan Bongino, a man whose entire career before this was basically trashing the FBI as a corrupt, deep state organization.
And his justification is somehow even worse.
I was paid for those opinions.
Oh.
We will get into that. It's a statement that raises these profound questions about trust in the very institutions prosecuting this case.
Okay, so let's start with that legal trap. The place where politics and the law have created this complete mess. The accidental pardon paradox.
It's the perfect place to start because it shows the immediate real-world consequences of using clemency as a political weapon.
So let's look at the document itself. Early in the new term, one of the first big moves was this grant of clemency for nearly 1,600 people charged in connection with January 6th.
And this wasn't, a carefully targeted list of commutations. The sources are all in agreement. They call it extraordinarily broad.
And that breadth is the whole problem. It's where the legal black hole opens up.
It really is. The key phrase in the proclamation covers defendants accused of, and I'm quoting here, offenses related to events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021.
At or near. Those 3 words are about to launch 1,000 legal bills.
Every single part of that is a potential legal battleground. What counts as related? What is the exact boundary of at or near?
And that's exactly what Cole's defense lawyers are going to hang their hat on. The pipe bombs, which thankfully never went off, were placed at the RNC and DNC headquarters.
Correct. So the legal question becomes, are those locations at or near the Capitol?
And what do the sources say? How close are we talking?
This is where it gets really interesting. A literal geographic analysis, not a political one, confirms that, yes, both buildings are considered at or near the Capitol grounds. They're not, miles away across town. They are proximate.
So geographically, they're in the zone.
They're in the zone. And the timing, January 6, 2021, is perfect. And were the actions related to the events? Of course they were. The whole point was to terrorize political institutions on the day of the certification.
So suddenly this bizarre legal theory starts to look, well, not so bizarre. A defense lawyer could actually stand up in court and make a straight-faced argument that their client's actions fit the literal text of the pardon.
They absolutely could. They can say, look, our client's offense was directly related to the political events of that day, and it occurred physically inside the geographic area your own proclamation defined.
And you have to layer on the motive again. He says he did it for Trump because he believed the election lies. So in the political story that whole movement tells, Brian Cole Jr. should be a hero.
He should be a triple hero in that narrative. He's a true believer who took action. And that's where the optics become just a complete disaster for the administration, no matter what happens in court.
But hold on, the prosecution has a counter, right? The proclamation covers defendants. Cole wasn't a defendant when it was issued. He wasn't even known. Surely that's the end of it.
That is absolutely the prosecution's main line of attack. It's their technical escape hatch. They'll argue he wasn't a defendant in the legal sense at that specific moment in time.
And that sounds pretty solid legally.
It is. It's a strong argument. But this is where you have to look beyond just the technical wording and consider the intent of the grant, the political intent.
And the intent was pretty clear, wasn't it? It was to give a blanket pass to everyone who acted on behalf of the stolen election narrative on January 6th.
Precisely. The way the former president talks about the Jan 6ers, calling them hostages and marauders, frames them all as patriots. The broad, almost careless language of the clemency grant was designed to reflect that political desire, to shield everyone involved.
So the prosecution has to argue that this specific crime, planting pipe bombs, is somehow in a totally different category.
Yes, they have to carve it out. They'll say this was premeditated domestic terrorism, not just, street brawling or trespassing, and that it was never intended to be covered.
But that's a tough line to draw, isn't it? The pardon covered people convicted of seditious conspiracy. It covered people who assaulted police officers with flagpoles and chemical sprays. Those are violent felonies.
And that's the ambiguity the defense will exploit. They'll ask, why does assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon get a pass? But placing a device that didn't even detonate just a few blocks away doesn't.
It gets legally very murky very fast.
Because the pardon itself wasn't a precise legal document. It was a political statement. It was messy. It was broad. And now they're stuck with the consequences of that language.
So even if the defense ultimately fails, and it probably would, it's a long shot.
A very long shot.
The very fact that it's a plausible, discussable legal strategy is the real point here.
That's it. It drives home the absolute outrage of the initial pardons. It forces everyone to look at the unintended downstream consequences of using executive power that way.
You're creating these legal black holes that the system then has to spend years and millions of dollars trying to navigate. It's a constitutional embarrassment baked right into the case.
A total embarrassment. And this legal chaos, this self-inflicted wound, sets the stage perfectly for the second layer of this farce.
Political theater.
The jaw-dropping hypocrisy that unfolded at the press conference announcing Cole's arrest.
Okay, let's move to that, because this is where the rhetoric just completely detaches from reality.
It really does.
So, the press conference. The administration rolls out some key figures, longtime loyalists, to announce this big capture. We're talking about Kash Patel and Pam Bondi.
Two people who are, deeply embedded in the Magie political world.
And they stand up there and deliver these speeches full of this very high-minded, institutional-sounding rhetoric. It's a complete 180 from everything they've said about January 6th for years.
Let's start with Kash Patel. He gets up there and with this incredibly serious tone, he says that when you attack American citizens, when you attack institutions of legislation and the nation's capital, you attack the very being of our way of life.
Strong words.
Very strong. And then he follows it up by saying the FBI and DOJ under this new leadership will always refute it and combat it with great resolve.
The message being, we are the protectors of the institution. We are the party of law and order. This kind of violence is absolutely unacceptable.
And you just sit there and the immediate, unavoidable contrast just slaps you in the face. This is the exact same political operation that just granted clemency to and celebrated 1,600 people who did that exact thing.
And we really need to be clear about who we're talking about here. This isn't just about, the guy who wandered into the Capitol and took a selfie.
Not at all. The narrative that they were all just peaceful tourists is a fiction. The sources are very specific here. The pardons included leaders and members of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys.
People convicted of sedition, seditious conspiracy.
Let's just pause on that for a second. Seditious conspiracy is not just rioting. It's a plot to overthrow the government of the United States by force. It's one of the most serious charges in the entire federal code.
And many of their sentences came with terroristic enhancements.
Because they were planning for political violence. The evidence in those trials was overwhelming. We're talking about encrypted chats, military-style formations, plans to bring in a quick reaction force with a massive arsenal of weapons stashed just outside D.C.
They used stun guns on police. They used flagpoles as spears, bear spray. Over 140 officers were injured. That's the reality of the violence they engaged in.
So that brings us to the screaming central question that no one at that press conference could answer. How can you stand there and say the FBI will protect the very being of our way of life from a pipe bomber?
While you are actively calling the people who breached the Capitol and fought police for hours heroes and hostages,
You can't. The logic completely collapses. You cannot hold up Brian Cole Jr. as this symbol of unacceptable domestic terrorism while you're elevating convicted seditionists to the status of political martyrs. It's intellectually dishonest.
It's beyond dishonest. You're condemning the motive in one case, the belief the election was stolen, while you're rewarding the exact same motive in the other 1,600 cases.
And that disconnect was on full display when the press started asking questions, especially with Pam Bondi.
Right, you had reporters from places like the Daily Wire trying to push other conspiracies, then asking about Kamala Harris's location near the DNC bomb, trying to imply there was some other cover-up.
And Bondi just dodged it. It was a classic political maneuver. She blamed the prior administration, said the evidence was just sitting there collecting dust, and used it as a chance to praise her own team's hard work.
Pure political spin. But it avoided the one question that mattered.
The one question that exposes the whole game. What makes Brian Cole Jr. and his unexploded bombs so much worse than the 1,600 marauders who used actual violence against police and are now hailed as heroes?
And there is no good answer. You can't say it's about the level of violence because many of the pardoned were far more violent. His devices were inert. They were actively fighting.
You can't say it's about the intent to disrupt the government because that's exactly what seditious conspiracy is. There is no logical line you can draw.
Which is why the sources just call the whole thing a total injustice and an insult to the democracy. The pardons made any future condemnation of this kind of violence completely meaningless.
They destroyed their own moral authority on the subject. They can no longer credibly claim to be upholding the rule of law when it comes to January 6th because they already picked which lawbreakers were their heroes.
Before we move on to the third piece of this, though, we have to give credit where it's due. The actual police work here, it's a different story entirely.
Absolutely. It is critical to separate the political circus from the actual investigation. The FBI's work to find this guy was, according to all sources, a real achievement.
This wasn't a lucky break. This was years of painstaking, old-school detective work mixed with modern forensics.
Think about what they were starting with. Almost nothing. A masked figure, probably in the dark, leaving 2 crude bombs that didn't go off. There's no big crime scene, no witnesses to interview.
So they had to build a case from scratch, out of tiny details.
Exactly. The source material mentions things like focusing on the suspect's Nike shoes. They analyzed grainy surveillance footage to identify the specific model, the tread pattern.
And then what? Just look for anyone who owns those shoes.
It's so much more complex. They would cross-reference that shoe model with sales data from stores in the entire region, trying to narrow down purchases made within a certain time frame. Maybe looking for cash purchases that wouldn't have a name attached.
It's like finding a needle in a continent-sized haystack.
It is, and it's not just that. It's piecing together hundreds of hours of video from different cameras to track his route. It's analyzing his gait, his body type. It's looking for tiny fibers or DNA evidence left behind.
This is the hard, grinding work of law enforcement that we rarely see. It's not about confidential informants giving you a name. It's about building a case, thread by thread, over thousands of hours.
So the rank-and-file agents, the forensic teams, the analysts who broke this case, they deserve immense credit for their professionalism and their sheer persistence.
And that professionalism stands in such stark, painful contrast to the political appointees at the top.
Which unfortunately brings us right to the third, and maybe the most deeply troubling part of this whole story.
The integrity of the FBI's own leadership.
And how it's been fundamentally compromised.
This whole problem really comes to a head with one person, the deputy FBI director, Dan Bongino.
To understand this, you have to understand his background. Bongino, like Battelle, wasn't a career law enforcement professional. He was a right-wing podcaster. And his primary job, his brand, was to talk trash about the FBI.
So the person who is now number 2 at the FBI spent his previous career telling his audience that the FBI was a corrupt, politically motivated, deep state agency.
It's the ultimate fox in the henhouse scenario.
Yeah.
His entire professional identity was built on hating the FBI. He pushed every conspiracy theory imaginable, claiming the Bureau was at the center of all of them.
And it wasn't just general attacks, it was specific to this very case.
This is what is so staggering. Before he was appointed, Dan Bongino was on social media, on X, actively promoting a conspiracy theory about the pipe bombs.
What was he saying?
He posted that the investigation was a massive cover-up. He claimed the reason they hadn't found the bomber was because the person responsible had to be either a connected anti-Trump insider or an inside job.
He was literally saying the FBI was covering up the crime, that it was a false flag.
Yes. The man, now taking credit for solving the crime, previously claimed the crime was a hoax, being covered up by the very agents he now leads.
The cognitive dissonance is it's breathtaking. To stand at that podium and praise the fact-based investigation that found the guy, when you spent years telling people the whole thing was a lie.
And that leads to the moment that really just broke the foundation of public trust. When a reporter finally cornered him and asked him to reconcile his past statements with his current job.
He gave that unbelievable answer.
He looked the interviewer in the eye and said, quote, "I was paid in the past, Sean, for my opinions." And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he added, "One day I'll be back in that space, but that's not what I'm paid for now."
Let's let that sink in. I was paid for my opinions.
It's a full-throated confession of the most profound cynicism I have ever heard from a public official.
He's admitting that his entire anti-FBI crusade, his belief in the pipe bomb cover-up, his deep state rhetoric, it was all for sale. It wasn't a conviction, it was a product.
And now that his paycheck comes from the U.S. taxpayer to run the FBI, his opinions have miraculously changed to fit his new job.
The damage that one statement does is almost incalculable. How can anyone, and I mean anyone, trust a single thing he says now?
You can't. If his past beliefs were just paid opinions, how do we know his current statements about the FBI's integrity aren't just his current paid opinions? It fatally undermines his credibility and, by extension, the credibility of the entire leadership.
And our sources say this isn't just an issue with Bongino, it's a pattern. This strategy of appointing people who are fundamentally hostile to the agencies they're supposed to lead, it's been a freaking disaster on the ground.
That's the systemic problem. The sources report that the appointments of both Bongino and Patel have caused absolute shockwaves inside the Bureau. The whole rank and file, the FBI, the union, they're all aghast.
They see them as political hacks, right? Not serious law enforcement leaders.
Exactly. They're viewed as know-nothings, who have no idea how the Bureau actually operates, who are only there because of their political loyalty.
I can only imagine what that does to morale. It has to be a huge slap in the face.
Think about it. First, you're told the people who assaulted you and your colleagues on January 6th are heroes who deserve pardons. And now, your new bosses are the guys who spent the last 5 years calling you corrupt deep state thugs on their podcasts.
It's a deliberate strategy of institutional decay. It's picking people who are guaranteed to be opposed to the mission of the agency they lead.
It's a pattern we see everywhere. You want a Secretary of Energy. Pick someone who hates renewable energy. You want to run Health and Human Services. Find someone who spent their career trying to dismantle public health programs.
Then the end result is this constant, avoidable outrage that just corrodes public trust in government itself. It's impossible to have faith in these institutions when the people in charge admit their beliefs are for sale.
So now the entire pipe bomb investigation, this genuine law enforcement success, is tainted. The people announcing the victory are the same people who said the crime was a hoax.
It's the ultimate own goal. They managed to achieve a major win for public safety and simultaneously destroy the moral authority of that victory by having these compromised figures be the face of it.
A total own goal.
So let's try to pull these three threads together because they're all part of the same deeply dysfunctional story.
They're completely intertwined.
First, you have the absurd legal risk of this accidental pardon, a ticking time bomb in the case file created by purely political sloppy language.
Then you have the breathtaking hypocrisy of the officials condemning this one act of violence while celebrating thousands of others.
And finally, you have the foundational rot, the systemic damage caused by putting people in charge of our most critical institutions who openly admit their integrity is for sale.
And when you put it all together, what you're left with is just a profound insult to democratic norms. It's a governance strategy where loyalty is the only thing that matters. Not competence, not consistency, not integrity, just loyalty.
And that's incredibly dangerous. When the concept of the rule of law becomes so flexible that it only applies to your political enemies, then it ceases to have any meaning at all.
The law just becomes another tool in the political war. And that's not a sustainable path for a democracy.
The big takeaway here, then, isn't really about Brian Cole Jr. It's about how the political decisions of the past don't just go away.
Exactly. They have a half-life. That clemency grant wasn't just a news story for a week. It's now a living, breathing legal problem that could have consequences for years to come. It created a vulnerability in the legal system that we're only now beginning to see.
Which leaves us with a really unsettling final thought for you, the listener, to consider.
If that clemency proclamation was so extraordinarily broad that it created this bizarre potential defense for a pipe bomber, What other time bombs are lurking in that language? What other legal loopholes for other, maybe even more serious crimes are still hidden in that one carelessly written political document?
The fallout from that single act is far from over, and its full consequences are still a mystery.